what is restorative justice? It is a big question. It's really, I suppose, it's a way of responding to conflict or any offending or inappropriate behaviour that puts at the core of it, it puts the repair of the harm done, either to the person or to the relationship, over and above the need to punish somebody. And so, if you like, it's a mind shift, it's a philosophical shift from a more punitive model where you want to know who did it and who's to blame and who's going to get punished. And in that system, you don't have, really the victim's not part of that process. So the restorative process, the restorative philosophy, generally, is about putting the victim into that equation. And so a very key part of restorative justice is the fact that you involve all the stakeholders, what we call stakeholders, which is the person who committed the offence, if it's an offence, the person who is the victim, or the person people most affected by that behaviour, and the community as well, within which this is happening. And by involving them in that process, whatever that process is, and there could be a number of different processes, you are actually re-empowering the people that need to be re-empowered. You are getting people to take responsibility for their behaviour. It's done in a non-judgmental way, impartial way, to the person who's organising that process. It's about telling the truth, it's about respecting one another, it's about lots of things, restorative justice. Okay, well, there's a lot of assumptions there, and one of the things that restorative practice does is try not to make assumptions. Until you ask a victim how they're feeling, you don't know whether they're angry or reluctant themselves. There's a fantastic quote actually by Marshall Rosenberg, who was he died actually this year, but he's a very, very well known on the international stage for nonviolent communication, and his definition of anger is that anger is a tragic expression of unmet needs. And so what we try and do in restorative practice is to try and meet people's needs, to find out what their needs are. So rather than assuming people will be angry, if you ask them how they're feeling about it and what they would like, then you're giving them that possibility. So you may take the anger away. It may be that they're very hurt. You know, what does anger mean? It may be that they're very frightened, they may be scared, the time might not be right. And the reluctance of the perpetrator, if we're talking about an offence, what does that mean, the reluctance? Maybe it's shame, maybe it's fear themselves, maybe it's a need to be understood as well. So it's a very, very complex process. But to go back to your question, I suppose, whatever it sounds like from the outside, the important thing is to ask those people involved about it for themselves, and then it's up to them. It's not us as professionals that can dictate that. We need to find out from them and take the lead from them. No, I don't think it's ever going to be a complete substitute for imprisonment, no. I think there'll always be a need for some people to be imprisoned for their own safety or for the safety of the general public. However, I think there probably are too many people locked up where an alternative approach has not ever been attempted or tried. And I think the point about restorative practice is if it's there to be offered, people can take it or reject it on both sides. And if it's rejected, then the consequence of rejecting it is maybe a prison sentence. But in the first instance, in some cases, I mean, it's a terrible generalisation really, it might be, the point is, do you offer it in the first place? Do you offer an alternative? And you can think there's plenty of people that get locked up and you think, oh, I wonder what's really going on in that case. Is it really necessary to lock them up? I wonder if that's actually satisfied the victim of the offence or not. Has that met everybody's needs? Probably the answer is not. It might have met the needs of the politicians to say that they're strong on crime, it might have met societal needs, perceived needs, we need to be kept safe, but there might be other ways of doing that. I think it should be a culture. It's like a cultural shift. If it could be embedded in, it's very difficult to embed restorative practice into an adversarial system where we want to punish and we want to find out who's done what. But I think there are already ways in the youth justice system. It's certainly much more integrated into the legal system, and it's being pushed now. The government wants to put it into the adult service much more, but it needs a lot of money, it needs a lot of time, a lot of resource to do it, to embed it into a culture. And then it's not to say that it will ever completely replace prisons, but it will hugely enhance what's on offer at the moment, certainly for the victims of crime who get very little support. It is used in schools and in other institutions like housing associations, in companies, employment, where people are employed in companies. But they would not use the word justice. That's very ties it into the justice system. So in schools you talk about restorative approaches or restorative practice. And it's applicable to anything because it's about an approach to how you deal with conflict. And conflict is in our everyday life all the time. That's what happens. And it's how you respond, how people respond. But in schools specifically, what all the evidence shows that it has to be embraced as a culture by the whole school. It can't just happen in 1 year, for example. It has to be embraced by the senior management. Everybody needs to be trained, not just teaching staff, non-teaching staff, caretaker, dinner ladies, classroom assistants. Everybody needs to be within that ethos, and then the school can talk about we work within a restorative ethos, and that can replace, and in some schools has replaced very successfully, the punitive model. But it doesn't mean to say you can't get, kids don't get have to take responsibility for their actions. They do. Yes, I've never quite understood this soft touch thing, because punishment, if you like, you could say punishment's a soft touch. You put someone in prison having had a court case where they haven't even had to speak, where their solicitor's done all the talking, and there they are, they haven't had to face up to their responsibilities, they haven't had to meet the person they've offended against or people, and there they are with being institutionalised, with taking no responsibility. They can't even vote. And, there's a big hoo-ha about whether they should have the vote. In other words, they're not being responsible citizens. Whereas if you take a restorative approach, it is all about giving people that responsibility. I think it's an incredibly important part for everybody. Well, there might be, in which case the facilitator was good and well trained. If they felt it was a case they couldn't handle because they were influenced or biased, they would have to say, I don't think I can do this, and bring in a co-facilitator or someone else to facilitate. But, if you actually have taken on board the restorative philosophy, what you have to do is detach yourself from it, and what you're doing is facilitating an encounter between two people with whom there has been conflict. It's not my conflict, and I wasn't the one harmed. So I might think that the actual crime or the offence is pretty horrible. I'm entitled to that opinion as a facilitator, but my job in there is to help those people have a conversation about it. When you get to meet people, to be able to explain what it is and what you could offer them, there is a lot of interest. Sometimes it's actually literally hard to track down somebody. They don't answer phone calls, they don't respond to letters, you don't know if they're still living in the same address. And there's often a time lag between an offence being committed and then the young person actually going to court or being charged with it. And so for some victims of crime, they might not want to get involved because it happened last year, and they've moved on all by themselves, and they're fine with it. And they're a bit almost cross that it's being resurrected. It's like opening an old wound. So, I mean, that's a structural thing. It's not, and that will vary around the country in terms of the speed of time it takes to get from arrest to sentence, really. And with young people, we would like that to be as quick as possible, because you need to know what the consequences of their actions are, let alone from the point of view of the victim. But you'd be surprised at how many people would do. It's not a huge take-up, but the ones that do take it up really do want to do it. They have got their reasons for wanting to meet the young person. In my case, we're talking about young people that are the perpetrators of the crime. They have questions they want to ask, and very often they do it for very altruistic reasons. They say, well, I know it's too late for me, but I would like to meet this person to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else. And I've heard that many, many times. It's sort of, people do it for very good reasons. Well, the purpose of the process is, if it's a face-to-face meeting, even if it isn't a face-to-face meeting, is to try and rebuild something that's been broken, which is really the harm that's been done. Try and repair the harm, try and rebuild the relationship in the broadest sense, because these people might not know each other, but they're still sort of in relation to one another, societally, if you like. So what you're doing for the victim is you're putting them into the process, you're offering them that place, and it can be very, very empowering. You're acknowledging what's happened to them, they're hearing that acknowledgement, they're getting an opportunity to talk about what happened to them, either to the facilitator or to the young person later on down the road of preparation. They may or may not get some reparation, it depends what they want to get out of it. They may just want an apology and that's enough. Very often just the acknowledgement that this has happened to them is enough. Sometimes they get financial reparation, which they're very, very happy with. From the young person's point of view, I think a lot of them come at it's a nerve-wracking experience for them, but I think what they get out of it is a sense of they've done something to try and put it right. They've actually answered questions, they've explained, and they very often had a fantastic response. So what they get in the actual meeting, you can see this process happening, this relationship, this rebuilding of. For the young person, it's the opposite of stigmatisation. It's being accepted back, if you like, into the community, and they can feel really great about it afterwards. They feel, wow, I said sorry. She listened or heard what I said. I can draw a line under that now. The word closure is a bit of a tricky one, because you don't guarantee that. That's up to them to say whether they feel they've got that sort of sense of closure or not. But you certainly, if you're running a conference, you're facilitating that sort of a meeting, you want everybody to go out feeling a lot better than when they came in to that room. And you know that if that's happened, it's been up to a point. Sometimes it doesn't go quite as far as you'd have liked it, but it's gone so far, and that's good enough, if you like. Sometimes it goes brilliantly, and you know that a lot of very happy people are walking out of the room. To increase uptake, I think it's a slow build of a culture where this is an accepted thing that happens. Unfortunately, you can get very bad press on this, and you get horrible headlines, and people can get the wrong idea about what it is. So I think some good press, probably some good marketing. I don't mean it as in spin, I mean as in telling people what can actually happen, hearing people's experiences of what happened when they met the perpetrator of the crime that they were affected by. I think they're the ones, actually, other victims, if you like, are the people that could spread the word about how beneficial it was for them, because they're the ones that have had the experience of the crime, and they're the ones that have had the experience of the restorative process that they might have been involved in. But at the end of the day, if people don't want to, for whatever reason, that's their prerogative. And it's not there. It's not a this expression. It's not a magic wand. It isn't a magic wand. It's an approach that we think is more is kinder to people all round, and is much more healing, much more restorative, as it's called, than other methods perhaps. But it's not to be compelled, and it's not always right or appropriate, and it all depends on the individual cases really.